Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. This is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror, but we now call the Long War. Today, my friend, colleague, and partner in crime, Caleb Weiss, is joining us for an episode. Joe's got the day off. Caleb, of course, is a editor at FDD's Long War Journal, as well as a research analyst at the Bridgeway Foundation. Hello, Caleb.
Hey, again, not going to thank you for having me, but it's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. The Gaza stuff, the Israel-Hamas stuff is really, we pivoted to that. I figured give you a little break.
Right, which is something I don't do. So,
but you know what? There's some things for us to talk about now. It's kind of settling into a rhythm. I don't want people to think that it's just back to normal, but we get a little bit more time now to branch out and discuss some other issues. And we figured today was a good day to do so. We're going to talk about two things, the TikTok and Osama bin Laden controversy. And then we're going to take a quick sweep around the horn of jihadist groups and what they're saying and doing or not doing about the war in Gaza. So, but first, this one I woke up to yesterday and my brain was spinning, Caleb, the TikTok controversy. So influential TikTokers are talking about Osama bin Laden's message to America. Caleb, it's funny today, even Shabab weighed in on this controversy. Tell us what happened here. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, so, I don't think influential TikTokers is the right word. These are definitely a lot of Zoomers, a lot of, quote unquote, free thinkers type of these.
I saw one of the accounts had 12 million followers, though. Would you not call that influential? That's quite an audience. TikTok,
though. Some of these accounts have, way more than that. But
yeah, sure.
For all purposes, I think this is still a fringe issue on the site. But it's the demographic that worries me. These are largely Generation Z. So these are young, young adults, if not, late teenagers, that have somehow discovered bin Laden's infamous letter to America, which this is a diatribe he published in the early 2000s, listing out why he did 9/11, why he hates America. And essentially these, again, quote unquote, free thinkers, which are just, galaxy brained people, are essentially shifting their worldview uncritically by reading this one letter, which I want to say surprising, but it's not really surprising. I think we've been going down this path for a while, especially on TikTok, and just the level of disinformation that is on that platform is insane. Keep in mind, this is a Chinese app. The Chinese government has backdoor access to TikTok. The Chinese government is, always using that app as a way to, influence thinking and public perception in the West, particularly America. So I'm not saying this is another one of those times where they're doing that, but it certainly doesn't help that this is a Chinese government app. At the same time, I kind of think maybe there was some tweets that didn't help in this. There was a tweet, I'm not going to name him, but he tweeted about this, and that tweet itself now has 35 million views, which undoubtedly did not help the situation by shedding more light on this. But it is what it is. Interestingly, though, I don't know who made this tweet, but there's an interesting tweet going around now that's saying, hypothesizing that this letter wasn't even written by bin Laden. It was most likely written by Adam Gaddan, who was, the American propagandist for Al-Qaeda. And I don't know if I'm convinced on this, but it does make an interesting case of a lot of the letter is a diatribe against, U.S. cultural norms, which bin Laden wouldn't be that familiar with. He didn't really spend that much time, lambasting American cultural norms before that or after that. So it's an interesting read on that it could have been written by Adam Gaddan. But regardless, this is just a batshit insane past 24 hours of these kids and young adults changing their worldview after uncritically reading a piece of propaganda from a mass murderer.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned that with Adam Gadon. Now, like I would always say, okay, fine, maybe Adam Gadon wrote the speech for Bin Laden. Bin Laden said it. American presidents generally don't write their own speeches either, or most, presidents or prime ministers don't as well. Yeah, and Gadon is well known for some wackiness out there. I don't want to get into the details of it, but he certainly over time, well, while he was alive, was pushing some very nutty extremist ideas and ways for Al Qaeda to reach out to extreme elements of the American population. So it is interesting. What parts, Caleb, of this of the letter do you think resonated the most with these TikTokers?
Oh, this is the question, because it's undoubtedly the part where he says that Americans are blind to the fact that it's Zionists controlling our government and our media and everything about America, which in this case, like many cases, Zionist is just code word for Jews. So a lot of these kids and young adults are, again, uncritically reading this piece of propaganda saying that Zionists, quote unquote, Zionists control America, but what Bin Laden or maybe Gadon is really meaning is Jews. And is kind of, again, is in the same light of a lot of these. Okay, there are valid criticisms of Israel. I'm not going to say there's not, but a lot of the anti-Zionism talk, especially on the left, is essentially anti-Jewish rhetoric. And that's really what seems to resonate a lot with these young adults and teenagers is that part of the letter. But they can't read between the lines. They uncritically think he actually means Zionists, but no, he means Jews. But it is what it is.
Yeah, for these guys, it's one and the same. All Jews are Zionists. Absolutely. They don't make distinctions, and you're right. They don't. And the TikTokers who are putting this out, and I with this letter, have ever seen daylight amongst these TikTokers if the war between Israel and Hamas?
No, because it literally only happened because the war is happening. And I will say that originally they were quoting this from The Guardian. The Guardian famously published this letter in the early 2000s. The Guardian has since removed the article, citing that they didn't want to further propagate its language, its rhetoric. But they had the letter up for 20 years. And I have mixed feelings about the Guardian taking it down. On one hand, I understand why you don't want these idiots, these galaxy brain people, continue to spread that message uncritically, and again go down the anti-Jewishness of the letter. But at the same time, I think it should be public source. I think reading that letter and seeing how corrupt and how evil and how manipulative Bin Laden was, or whoever was who wrote this, is important to research and really understand the letter and the time and sort of what Bin Laden said was the reason for 9/11. As a researcher and analyst, I think that's important. I also, as an American, believe in free speech, and unfortunately, I think having that up is good. So again, mixed feelings, but also, and I guess the third reason, now that I'm thinking about it, is it really is. It does justify sort of, or they're using it to justify a lot of the evil language against quote unquote Zionists, and whatever. It's sort of like the tweet I mentioned before. It didn't help, removing it, because you're a lot of the people who propagated these TikToks are now claiming it's part of this wider Zionist conspiracy to have this removed. But again, who are they really meaning when they say Zionist conspiracy? And The Guardian removing it probably didn't help in propagating that conspiracy.
Yeah, I concur. Look, I understand and I agree with the intent. Or should I say sympathize, but in practice, it's just a bad idea for all the reasons you had mentioned. This free speech issue. Look, the only way to understand what someone like Osama bin Laden is doing is to be able to read the original source material. Should we be pulling down anything and everything that jihadists have published? These letters are important for historical reasons, as you mentioned, for research reasons, for understanding.
No, and I think this is my wider argument with censorship of extremist literature, propaganda videos in general. These groups are putting the shit out there themselves. It is free to access. It is free for everyone to look at and see what these guys and women actually believe. And a lot of it is evil. A lot of it is violent. A lot of it is terrible. One extreme example is all the Hamas footage that they themselves filmed of themselves murdering 1,400 people in Israel. That shouldn't be removed. Everyone should see that. Everyone needs to know how equal these people are. It's the same thing with this letter of, in that respect of, look how he's manipulating people. Look how he's using this language as a dog whistle against Jews. Look how he's framing how he did this attack. That's important. And, they themselves are putting that out there. And I think, not just for us researchers, but for the lay person as well, for them to understand what these guys actually believe and do is very important.
Yeah, look, the failing here isn't the Guardian or anyone else putting that letter online. The failing is our education system that has produced a generation or generations of youth whose minds are so malleable that they can be blown away by a letter written by Osama bin Laden or, credited to Osama bin Laden.
This is going to be
justified.
This is going to be Caleb's angry episode, but I think because this is also just dumb of follow up TikToks from a lot of these accounts or people or making TikToks about this or saying, why didn't they teach us about this conflict? Why didn't they teach us about this? Why didn't they teach us about that? Have you ever read the news? Have you ever just opened up Reuters? Have you ever just sorry for dropping the F-bomb, but have you ever fucking looked any of this shit up? No, you haven't. It's not you. It's not they, whoever they are. It's you for being too ignorant enough to actually look some of this shit up.
Yeah.
Sorry, again, Caleb's angry episode, but
we welcome Caleb's angry episode. It's been a while, and I knew this one would touch your heart, Caleb. So that's why I sprung it on you. Yeah. And for those who are responding that, maybe they should shut the fuck up if they hadn't been taught about this and they're going to go listen to some TikToker who also doesn't know about it. If this is how they're getting their information, look, I'm self-taught, again, I grew up, my mom got me books and I was interested in World War II history and Greek history, ancient Greece and mythology. I didn't wait for the schools to teach me stuff that I was interested in. I went and I don't see that happening as much. I had other friends who had other interests that did the same thing. And now, I think our kids' brains are being warped between social media and an education system that just really, I do agree that a lot of this isn't taught because let's face it, Caleb, in public schools, these are controversial topics. Why are we at war with, people who claim to be religious warriors? This isn't something they really want to talk about in schools.
I definitely agree. That's part of the issue is the U.S. education system, because I think there is an over focus on STEM. There's an over focus on sort of the hard sciences, whereas, sort of the social sciences kind of go to the wayside, which is a crime. It should not be happening, but that's what it is. But at the same time, I think the average American is pretty dumb. Again, sorry to be cynical and angry, but them not to know how to open up their phones. You literally have the world's.
I couldn't imagine growing up and having that resource to learn. I had to read freaking books, and you had to buy books, and they had to come in the mail, or you go to the bookstore. And they were expensive.
Because one example I saw, and this is just because I focus on Africa, is a lot of these TikToks are claiming, why didn't we learn about what's happening in Congo with sort of these mineral extraction, issues? If you opened up Reuters, if you opened up any sort of news in the last 10 years, if not more, you would have seen countless articles about all these mines in Eastern Congo or Western companies, Chinese companies in Eastern Congo extracting minerals. You would have known that. But it's on you for not being curious enough, I guess, about the world to do that. But at the same time, I would argue that the U.S. education system not teaching critical thinking or teaching, any sort of rational thinking is also at issue here.
Yeah, I mean, the people that are putting this stuff out, they clearly don't know who Osama bin Laden is or what he did, or else they wouldn't be talking so, wouldn't be so fascinated by him in an admiring way. And that's what I saw in those videos that I watched. It was just, there was,
Well, I mean, there's a common denominator there besides like the quote unquote anti-Zionism thing. It's even simpler than that. It's America bad.
yeah, well, yeah,
Anyone who
definitely.
treats
That's
it
what you got out of
bad.
this anti-Americanism in this. Yeah, for real. That's a great point, Caleb.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else on that topic, Caleb, that we hit?
Oh, I can go on, but I think we should.
Well, go ahead.
The listeners
Yeah, give
are
us your
tired of me
parting
being
thoughts
cynical
then,
about
and then we'll
my
move on.
fellow Americans. I just think it's dumb, man. Like it's just like you shouldn't be idolizing this man who not only killed 3,000 Americans in one day, but like has killed tens of thousands of his fellow Muslims from
Hundreds of thousands,
Morocco,
Caleb, with what he's
yeah,
inspired. Yeah.
from Morocco to Indonesia. Like he ruined countless lives, and you're going to praise him because he's ostensibly anti-American. Are you so blinded by ideology that you're not going to think critically about who that man is, or was rather, and what he actually did in the world? He's a mass murderer who led this global movement that ruined countless lives. But no, because America bad, which again, America does a lot of fucked up shit. Not going to dispute that. But you can't really equate the two. This is a guy who's an international terrorist who, the people that he was ostensibly fighting to defend against the great Satan, those were his primary victims.
Yeah, I'm going to here's going to be my parting thought. I can't take credit for this. I was just at a loss for words yesterday. I did not know how the hell do we respond to this. And then I went David Burge from Iowa Hawk. I'm just going to read his tweet because it's perfect. It perfectly sums up the thinking that you just described here. He says, here we go, quote, "If your kids think bin Laden made some good points, wait till I tell you about a vegetarian former art student with an ironic mustache whose impassioned manifesto about the Zionist oppression of his people sparked a worldwide movement," end quote. That's exactly what we're talking about here, right? Like, if you could think this about bin Laden, maybe we should be exploring the fascinating ideas of Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, rehabilitate Hitler. Yeah,
yeah. I just thought that was perfect. I didn't want or need to say anything more about that yesterday.
I think we're living in a South Park episode right now. Like Matt and Trey just created this really meta episode that we're all living in. Top tier genius level stuff, guys.
Yeah. Got to get in the bear suit. That's for sure. Definitely. Well, okay. Let's get on to our second topic for today, Caleb. Let's take a look just do a brief perusal. I think we mentioned this at the beginning. I don't know if we did it on here at Generation Jihad or if we did it on John Batchelor's show, but we did a little quick look at the what has been the jihadist response from Al Qaeda, from the Islamic State towards Hamas's attack on Israel. What have they been saying, and what have they have not been doing since Hamas and company launched its deadly attack on Israel on October 7th? Want to start with where do you want to start with that one, Caleb? What have you been covering? What have you been watching?
We'll just start with Africa.
Sure.
I think there's less stuff in Africa than sort of the other places. And we'll I guess start in West Africa, northwest Africa, with Al Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and the Group for Support of Islam and Muslims, AQIM and JNIM respectively. These are Al Qaeda's branches in North Africa and West Africa. So they've released a joint statement. This was back in October, shortly after the conflict started, where they openly praised the murder of Jews. They encouraged the Qassam Brigade to continue, which I think that's an interesting point to point out, is that AQIM and JNIM specifically praised the Qassam brigades, which was an open admiration for Hamas, which got some pushback on Twitter for me pointing that out, which I also thought was bullshit. Was, who do you think Qassam is? It's Hamas. But regardless of that, they basically said that you should continue. This is the only way that you're going to defeat the Zionist entity. Basically, if you continue the fight. This will encourage other mujahideen around the world. Your fight is part of the same fight that we're fighting against other criminal entities. It's part of the same conflict. In a nutshell, that's essentially what they said. AQIM has also released a video since then by one of its ideologues, Abu Yasir al-Jazairi, this Algerian ideologue in AQIM. He kind of said the same stuff. He also took it one step further, saying that the Mujahideen should be united, which is a common Al-Qaeda talking point around the world. They're big on jihadist unity. So nothing too surprising there. Turning to East Africa with Shabab, they've put out a statement. They were one of the first Al-Qaeda groups outside of the Middle East to release a statement. And again, they sort of said the same thing as AQIM. Is very, very similar of, again, encouraging the Mujahideen to, continue attacking Jews. They praised the murder of Jews that started it. They also said that, this is Israel is a bastard entity that should be confronted, that should be destroyed. They encouraged, the Mujahideen to continue to fight to inspire other Mujahideen around the world. And again, said that this is part of the same fight that they're fighting in Somalia, which again is a common thing for Al-Qaeda. It likes to put itself within the context of the fight against Israel as part of a support and recruitment and mobilization factor for them. But on the ground, I think this is where Shabab is the most interesting. Shabab has been hosting, since the Hamas invasion of Israel, pro-Palestine rallies throughout the areas it controls in Somalia. So I think they've had like 6 or 7 now, maybe more. And these are not small. I mean, there are hundreds of people at these events. There was 1 or 2 that maybe had over 1,000 people. They're holding up, Al-Qaeda banners. They're holding up slogans that says, Jerusalem will not be Judaized. They're saying, one Ummah. They're burning American and Israeli flags. The whole 9 yards with that. But to my knowledge, they're one of the only Al-Qaeda groups. Again, I could be wrong. I don't focus elsewhere, but they're one of the only Al-Qaeda groups that has really done these local level pro-Palestine demonstrations, which I think
that's correct, Caleb. I haven't detected this in Africa, or I'm sorry, in the Middle East or in South Asia. So yes, correct.
It's super interesting. And I think it really shows the strength of Shabab to have these events in their controlled territory, and 2, really showing how they're trying to use this conflict as a mobilization factor for their own men, which shouldn't be too surprising. Shabab has done since 2019, when the U.S. moved the embassy to Jerusalem. They've done numerous high-profile attacks in this "Jerusalem will not be Judaized" campaign. Like they've done the 2019 terrorist attack in Nairobi, Kenya, and then the January 2020 attack on the U.S. base in Manda Bay in eastern Kenya. Both of those were part of that Jerusalem will never be or will not be Judaized campaign. So Shabab has a long history of putting itself within that conflict and using it to mobilize its own men. And it's really all that's been happening in Africa with Al-Qaeda, at least. But I think on the Islamic State angle, and this is more broad because the Islamic State has released these statements through their weekly newsletter Al-Naba. So it's speaking more globally for all of the Islamic State. But they've taken a harsher stance than Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, obviously, as we mentioned numerous times on this podcast and written elsewhere, Al-Qaeda is more of this big tent organization, right? They're willing to work with others. They're willing to support others if it's for the common goal of establishing this caliphate. The Islamic State is my way or the highway. So while they praised the murder of Jews, they also criticized Hamas. They said, you shouldn't support people who are supported by Iran, the evil Shia. Same thing with PIJ. So while the killing of Jews is good, the people who are doing it are bad, is essentially what the Islamic State has been saying. And then 2 days or yesterday, when they released this week's issue of Al-Naba, they criticized this Arab leader forum that the Arab world had about this conflict. Various Middle Eastern dictators and autocrats met and discussed the conflict. The Islamic State criticized it, saying that these guys were too scared to do anything about Israel. They're not willing to do anything. So it's up to you, the Mujahideen, the correct Mujahideen, to actually defeat the Zionist entity. These Arab leaders are too corrupt and too beholden to the West to do anything. So that's the Islamic State side of, let's praise killing Jews, but those who are doing it, you suck.
You're not one of us.
Yeah, so that's sort of like the two groups' outlook of this in a nutshell. Which again just gets back to how these groups operate on a much grander scale.
And this is
go ahead. Neither of these groups have any meaningful role in the conflict. There are small Salafi jihadi cells in Gaza, which Joe, if he was here, he could tell you all about them. But I know from private conversations with Joe, like there are groups that support Al Qaeda. There were groups that support the Islamic State, but they're nominal at best. They're not doing that much. So
marginalized.
These groups, have a big talk about Israel-Palestine, but neither Al Qaeda nor Shabbat nor the Islamic State are that actually involved on the ground. It's more of mobilizing supporters elsewhere.
Yeah, it's well put, Caleb. I think that is you outlined the difference between Al Qaeda and the Islamic State on this issue, and we've always described it, big tent versus my way or the highway, and I always view the big tent, the flexible, adaptable jihadists to me to be a bigger strategic threat. I'll share with you what I've witnessed over the last month. I'll start with Al Qaeda Central. They described this attack as, quote, a gem in the battles of Islam in the modern history of our Ummah, end quote. And then they turned and they urged their followers to attack the U.S. And Israeli military targets across the Muslim world. They also, Al Qaeda sent, this is from Al Qaeda's General Command, or what people call Al Qaeda Central. They also urged Muslim scholars to basically to embrace all jihadi ideology, including that of Hamas, and to continue their attacks. That was actually a statement issued by attributed to Asima Maghrebi.
Which that's pretty interesting in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
We're going to accept these scholars, even Hamas scholars, but
as long as they're preaching jihad,
which
they're good
is
with it, right?
When Zawahiri was alive, he went on these long diatribes against the Muslim Brotherhood, which Hamas is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. So it's interesting that I don't know if it's it reflects any sort of tangible change in their outlook, but it's certainly ideological. Of in this moment, we're going to use these guys because it makes sense, but yet Zawahiri famously hated the Muslim Brotherhood.
He should know, he came from that part of the world. So I found that that was a very, very interesting point. I'm glad you picked up on that, Caleb. I think this is part of Al Qaeda, sort of broad and trying, again, keeping that broad tent. Maybe they're trying, maybe it's a form of outreach. They may be looking at this from another perspective too. If Hamas does lose this fight, that, they could be there to help pick up the pieces as well. It's a possibility. Right. I think that would be wrong thinking because of given Hamas's supporters and the way it's organized and whatnot. It's just getting in bed or with Al Qaeda would be a major problem. Look, I think there's a reason Hamas stopped doing suicide attacks. After the second Intifada, and switched to more military because it was just a bad look for them. They didn't want to be compared to Al Qaeda. But but that could be what Al Qaeda's thinking. You had a thought on that, Caleb?
Right. Well, I mean, there's like historical precedents for reaching out to, not unaffiliated scholars, but scholars of other, militant groups or, thought leaders or thought institutions. In the Bin Laden files, there are numerous letters between Al Qaeda Central and various sheikhs around the Gulf. And these sheikhs supported other Iraqi militant groups. A lot of them supported the Islamic Army of Iraq, sort of being their Gulf-based ideologues. And there's a lot of letters Al Qaeda central leadership sent to these sheikhs, sort of trying to get them on their side. So I guess there is historical precedence, right, of this outreach or at
Yeah.
least nominal affiliation with scholars from other groups that they don't actually like, or they, I guess, like trying to figure out how to phrase this, because I don't think not actually like is not the correct word, but it's just different ways of thinking.
Yeah, not fully on board with the program, but maybe like 80% there. Look, there's between the Taliban, the Deobandis, and the Wahhabis or the Salafists, there's big differences. But Al Qaeda has been willing to, that's within Afghanistan, right? Has been willing to work through the problems with them. That's how Al Qaeda, that's the big tent Al Qaeda that we're talking about here. And I find that to be interesting. I always thought the Palestinian one, like, whereas Al Qaeda has always talked a big game about it, they just knew that they were locked out of that conflict in essence because of, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah, that those issues, it just was extremely difficult for them to even get a foothold there.
I mean, so it's like a market share. Like, how could they wedge their way in?
And now, maybe they probably see, and it's just a good look for their supporters too. Remember, their messaging isn't always external. Sometimes it's internal too. They're the members of Al Qaeda are probably looking at this, and going, "What does the bosses think?" And because we like what Hamas did, and Al Qaeda wants to show their own people that, look, we have views on this, and we get this, and we think this is a good thing, even if they may not think. I don't know what they really think about it. We'd have to get a tranche of their documents in order to know.
I like that you said that like a lot of their messaging is for internal purposes or for their own members. And I think a lot of analysts and researchers forget that.
There's stuff. Yeah, often dual messaging, right? It can be for both. It really can.
Right. But like a lot of, because Zawahiri was famously derided for his boring speeches, but those weren't for analysts. Those weren't for the Western world.
Right.
Those were for his critics in the Middle East. Those were for his critics within Al Qaeda. Those were for his critics within the Islamic State. That's sort of why they were so boring. I don't know how well they were received or how well they worked, but like those were messages not for us.
Yeah, Bin Laden was a better external messenger. That was his strength. And we've had this conversation numerous times. I probably on Generation Jihad as well. Like, the perception of Zawahiri is he's a bore and nobody likes him and he's not charismatic. Well, what the hell do we know about what's charismatic to a jihadist? He may not.
No, I think the best argument about that is like, other than I guess the Islamic State and its splinter Jabhat al-Nusra, no other Al Qaeda branch left Zawahiri.
And we can't build a time machine and make Osama bin Laden be alive and see how he would have weathered that storm, because we don't know. Because there were conflicts between the Islamic State and Iraq, right, pre-ISIS, when it was part of Al Qaeda, internally, right, with Al Qaeda's, with the problems with the Ansar Islam and his Al Qaeda in Iraq and Al Qaeda in Iraq and Al Qaeda General Command. There were tensions and whatnot. So that stuff was building for quite a long time. It was a personnel. Anyway, point being, difficult to prove that bin Laden would have certainly managed that crisis any better. I mean, I think Zawahiri, given all those problems, held Al Qaeda together pretty well and got a pretty fat victory in Afghanistan and sitting pretty in Somalia and Mali and through the Sahel in general.
Yeah. So I think, a lot of the messaging that they do for Palestine is what I was saying with Shabab and, AQIM is it's mobilizing their supporters. It's mobilizing, their men. It's giving them something to fight for. It's giving them more morale booster. A lot of the messaging is for them. It's for people in the Middle East. It's for people in Africa. Not necessarily for us or anyone in Israel. That what threat does Shabab have to Israel? None. But they might attack Israeli interests in East Africa. Which, how would they do that? They need to get their men on board. They need to get supporters on board. This is the way they do it. And I think this is an important point of, there's been a lot of, rhetoric about whether or not this conflict will have any repercussions in the West. Obviously, I think as time moves on, you might see more coordinated plots. But this is where these messages come into play of, these supporters for AQIM, JNIM, Shabab could be based in Europe. They could be based here. They see these messages, they become inspired, they decide to do something on their own.
They might even trend on TikTok, for all we know.
And it might trend on TikTok, yeah.
But yeah, so I'll do two quick ones. Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Its leader, Khalid bin Umar Batarfi. He basically did a long Q&A. And it basically came down to, he called on for, both members of Al Qaeda and then what they call, I hate that term, but lone wolf jihadists or the inspired jihadists to conduct strikes against Israel and the United States. That's, he loved the attack on Israel. So this one was definitely messages to the followers, right? He's taking actual questions. And then Al Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, they also urged attacks against Israel and the West. And they also, I found this to be interesting. I didn't see this in any of the others. They called on members of Muslim militaries, security forces, the army, police, to turn their weapons on their enemies, be that Americans who are their or other countries who they're partner with, or the states themselves, who Al Qaeda, of course, views as apostates. So, and what I haven't seen, like you, I haven't seen real action come out from under this. I think Shabab's action is probably the most that we've seen throughout all of this conflict. It's hard to tell but I haven't seen any spike in attacks that are being claimed in the name of the Palestinian people or anything to that nature. I think at the end of the day, with both Al Qaeda and the Islamic State, they're so focused on waging their local insurgencies. Like I heard one, I'm not going to name names, an analyst say that he expected attacks in the Sahel and Somalia to increase because of this. And I was like, these groups are just so focused right now on the eye. They got their eye on the prize of taking over the Somalia, Mali, and destabilizing Niger and the rest of the Sahel. That I don't think they're going to launch additional attacks just because of this. What do you
I mean, if they launch additional attack, it'd be a high profile one, sort of like what Shabab did in 2019 or early 2020. But those are one-off events. That's what I was talking about earlier. But I agree. I don't see Shabab, AQIM, JNIM increasing their tempo of attacks over this war. They're continuing business as usual. Yes, this is just an added bonus for them.
It is. And if they did launch a high profile attack, it'd be an attack they probably were going to do anyway, for one. And two, they're just gaining propaganda benefits from it, right?
Right. I mean, you can go back to Shabab and the 2019 attack in Nairobi. They had precedent already for attacking Nairobi.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They've done that in 2013. They've attacked in northeastern Kenya also since 2013. So there's already precedent for them to do attacks in Kenya. It just so happens that they're able to use this added leverage or added propaganda, which if they do another attack in the name of this war, it was probably already something that they wanted to do in the first place. This is just, again, a bonus.
And one of my responses when I heard that was that, that the attacks would increase was Shabab already launched, as you reported excellently and funnily enough. And it's always interesting when this happens that Shabab responded to that the number of suicide attacks was it September? Is that right, Caleb?
Yeah, September.
Yeah, was the highest since Shabab came into being. So what are they going to top that because of the, that to me just shows it's business as usual. And the business as usual is high tempo of attacks.
Yeah. And just to be clear, like the rate of suicide bombings in Somalia in October dropped. So if you were to expect something to increase because of this war, it didn't happen.
Right. Exactly. All right, Caleb, excellent stuff. You got anything else to report here?
Not unless you want me to get angry again, but I think that's good.
Stay angry, my friend. Let's save it for another day. Let's get you back on soon.
Actually, I have one hot take.
Yeah, let's go for it. Let's go for it. You got
ban TikTok. I think it's a national security risk, not just for these brain dead people, but the fact that we're allowing millions of people in America to use a Chinese-owned app wherein the Chinese government has backdoor access should not be a thing.
I could not agree with you anymore. Look, I think, to the listeners, I think you can gather Caleb and I are free speech people, but something like TikTok is very clearly a threat. It's not a altruistic app that's being, malignly used. I think it's a malign government has created an app and that's wormed its way into the brains of our
and
children.
To be fair, I also don't like the backdoor access that, Facebook, WhatsApp, X, / Twitter also gives to the U.S. government. But at least there is a checks and balance system here, and it's not an authoritarian government that's committing a genocide against a portion of its people, like China is with the Uyghurs.
It's well said, Caleb. Excellent, Caleb. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Generation Jihad. Great to have you again, or great to hear from you again.
That's been a while, but I blame Hamas for keeping me away.
Well, they gave you look on the bright side. Think of it this way: they gave you a little break. But
I will have to send a thank you card to Yahya Sinwar.
I mean, look, my joke always. Not only are they evil, but often they're inconvenient. That really put those together, and it really just makes me want to eliminate them all. Thanks again for joining us for today's episode of Generation Jihad. Just a reminder, you can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Make sure you subscribe, leave us a review, preferably a positive one, but only if we earned it. Thanks again, and we'll see you all again soon.